Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Ask the Expert. And our guest speaker today is Tom Dyer. I'm just going to share some information we've got here. Brilliant. So, Tom, to start today's session, we'd like to ask you, what is acceptance and commitment therapy?
Hello there. Thank you very much for having me. So acceptance and commitment therapy, it's often referred to as the third wave of cognitive behavioral therapy, the CBT. And a lot of people think of CBT, they think of having to confront your fears head on. So if you're afraid of spiders, you might get shown lots of pictures of spiders. And through time, and that's a very basic analogy, by the way, you will overcome that fear because of that that distance has reduced between the fear and what the actual thing is. So it's the third wave because it is a confrontation of your fears, of your situation, of your circumstances, but only insofar as you rely on your own resources to overcome that different fear. So it believes that we have the capability to recognize unhelpful thoughts versus helpful thoughts, and that we're able to actually provide an assessment as to whether we should or should not do something. And it takes us away from that flight or fight tendency, and actually helps us to stay in the present moment and not making knee-jerk reactions to things, which is very common because it's how our brain is made. Our brain is made to keep us safe, and it hasn't necessarily grown up with the times that we're in now, where we're not chased by tigers and lions out in the wilderness. Our dangers are very much created usually online or with the circumstances that we find ourselves in, and also from a lot of judgment. But thoughts themselves are not inherently bad, and this is where ACT can really help us determine when something is fact, or whether it's an evaluation or description and evaluation, and whether or not something is helpful, unhelpful. Whereas a lot of times we often think that something is good or bad. ACT doesn't actually care. It doesn't matter if something is good or bad, because someone else's good or bad might be different to your good or bad. So it's whether or not it's a helpful thought or an unhelpful thought in trying to move forward. And ACT is very simple in that it looks at whether or not you are living a life in line with certain principles, which is really very simple. There's a hexaflex, which is a 6-point system, and that's ensuring that we live in the present moment, that we understand our values, that we're able to take committed action, and that we're able to see ourselves as context, cognitive diffusion, and also experiential acceptance. So using this hexaflex, which ACT very much relies on, we're able to see ourselves as we currently are and who we want to be, as opposed to flash forwarding to circumstances that aren't real yet and living in the past of things that aren't very helpful. So living in the present moment is quite an obvious one. It's being right here, right now. And mindfulness is a key part of what ACT is about. And mindfulness in not the yoga kind of sense, but mindfulness in that I'm aware of my present situation, what I'm feeling, what I'm smelling, what I'm seeing, and ACT very much as a way of grounding us in the present moment. Values, finding out who we actually are and why we are who we are, and the kind of person that we want to be when we're trying to grow up. That's what ACT is very much focusing on, is how do we want to live our lives? And it's all well and good having those values, but if you don't know what you're doing with those values, then that's not very helpful either. So it teaches us to take committed action. So this is me going through the different steps of the hexaflex and actually giving yourself confidence to take action that is based on those values and the things that you can or cannot do. Self as context is looking at yourself in the world that you live in and recognizing that some of the thoughts that you may have may or may not actually be real, and that they might just be things that we're thought of. And then cognitive diffusion is some of those thoughts that aren't real, what we tend to do is we start believing them as fact. So you can use diffusion to separate this thought that isn't helpful and actually recognize it for what it is. It's just a thought, as I mentioned before, may be helpful or unhelpful. So there's different techniques that we can use to diffuse away from feeling like a bad person, like you can't do something, that someone else's opinion of you is something that's real, because it might not actually be real, it's their opinion. And then experiential acceptance is looking at, I'm going to live my life in this world as best as I can, and in a manner that is going to keep me satisfied in this world as well. So there's lifelong learners out there. There's people that want to be caring for their family and friends. That experiential acceptance is the ability to go into new situations feeling challenged, but knowing that you can overcome them. And that's a really exciting prospect of having that experiential acceptance, of allowing experiences to happen to you, but not being overwhelmed by them, thinking, I'm going to get through this next step. Because going back to the mindfulness, we don't want to go too far because that's where we start getting into the wrong path, when actually there's a lot of excitement and enjoyment to be had by being on the wrong road. And to break down these 6 pillars, which I'll provide to you as well, you can break these down by essentially understanding that you are not your mind. The thoughts that happen to us, they do just happen to us. We don't decide to have a thought. A thought is something that's based on what we're viewing around us, but also from things that are completely unrelated to the situation that we're in. A thought can happen at any time, at any point, anywhere, and it may be linked to what you're doing, or it may have nothing to do with what you're doing, and yet it could still have the power to derail whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. So understanding that separation of you are not your mind and you are capable of overcoming those thoughts is really important. Is actually the linchpin of the whole thing. If you can grasp that the thoughts that happen to you are just things that happen over here and aren't actually real, then we're way over halfway there of understanding that you don't actually have to listen to what your brain is telling you, which might come as a big relief for a lot of people who believe that everything that they hear is fact, particularly when it's not very nice talking about you, which is also very common, where people think, well, if I'm thinking these thoughts, other people are definitely thinking them, but that's probably not the case. Once we've understood that we are not our mind, we can then focus on what we can change, but not what we can't. So if there are things happening to us that we can't physically change, there's no point in worrying about trying to change that situation. And the example that we used to give in the training course that we gave is that if you're waiting for a train and it's running late, what's the point in getting frustrated and pacing up and down the station and just getting angry and frustrated that the train isn't there? The train isn't there. So what else can you do with that time? Is there something else that's more productive, that's more aligned with your values that you could be doing that could actually help? Or in drastic circumstances, is there something you can arrange to actually change your mode of transport? But there's no point changing things that you can't change. And of course, the big one when I was working with the cancer charity is that people were like, if I lived in the perfect world, I wouldn't have cancer anymore. But you can't change that by yourself. So how are we going to live with the diagnosis that you have? How are you going to still keep living your life with the things that you can't change? What are the things you can change to reduce the suffering? Because there is a distinction between the pain and the suffering. The pain of something is something that directly happens to you, but suffering, depending on the circumstances, might be something that you've inadvertently added to that as well. And then once we've understood our brain and we've decided the things that we can change, we can then look at mindfulness and we can be present in the moment. And this is that self as context where we can see these thoughts happening to us. And being mindful and allowing ourselves permission to actually listen to the thoughts properly and think, I recognize that I'm having a thought, is a really powerful tool that we can grasp that you might not have ever thought before, because we see it as something that's fact, that's truthful. Whereas if you're focusing on your breath and you're having a mindful minute, because mindfulness doesn't have to be this thing that lasts hours or days or anything along those lines. You could literally have a mindful minute and start recognizing thoughts that happen to you. And just that ability to recognize a thought when you're trying to focus on something else is really powerful. You can say, oh, hello thought, I haven't seen you for a while. I'm busy over here though. I'm busy focusing on my breath, is one way to just let thoughts dissipate and disappear. And once you're aware of your thoughts, of the things you can change, taking action, of being mindful, that's when we can start looking at our values and actually start living a life that is committed to your values. So understand who you are, take some time to find out who it is that you want to emulate and who you want to be for your friends and family around you, and having the courage to then think, I'm actually going to do something about it. So 6 pillars, 4 tools to try and get it done. And that is essentially what acceptance and commitment therapy is in a nutshell.
Brilliant, thank you.